My name is Linda Parker, and I never thought grief could have layers. I thought losing my son, Michael, would be the deepest wound I'd ever carry. But sometimes life cuts twice, and the second cut comes from someone you once held close. I still remember standing at the front row of that small white church. The air smelled like old wood and lilies. People whispered behind me, their eyes soft with sympathy. But I couldn't hear any of it. My mind was wrapped around one simple fact: my son was gone. I kept my hands folded together, the way mothers do when they're trying to stay upright. I whispered his name under my breath again and again, like it would bring him back or at least fill the empty space inside my chest. Michael wasn't just my son. He was the boy who ran to me when thunderstorms shook the house. He was the man who insisted on calling every Sunday, even when life got busy. He was my only child, and my last piece of family. And then, in the middle of that heavy, quiet afternoon, when I should have been allowed to sit with my grief, my daughter-in-law, Emily, walked toward me. Her heels clicked against the church floor sharp, impatient, out of place. She didn't sit beside me. She didn't hold my hand. She didn't even look at the picture of her husband resting near the flowers. Instead, she leaned close to my ear. Her voice was low, cold, like she had practiced the words and didn't want anyone else to hear them. "Pack your bags tonight," she said. "When this is over, you're leaving my house." I blinked at her, confused, thinking maybe grief had made me hear things wrong. "What?" I whispered. Emily straightened up, her face stiff, her eyes dry. "Go grieve somewhere else," she said. "You're not staying with me anymore." And then she walked away, just like that, as if I were nothing more than a guest who had overstayed her welcome. I sat there frozen, my heart pounding in a way grief had never prepared me for. People around us kept praying, singing, crying, unaware that my world had cracked open a second time. I'd lost my son, and now I was losing the only place I had left to call home. I pressed a trembling hand to my chest and stared at Michael's photo, the warm smile, the kind eyes, the face I had raised from a baby to a man. In that moment, I wondered what he would think if he knew what was happening. Would he be disappointed? Would he be angry? Or would he simply tell me to breathe, the way he always did? I didn't know. I just knew that by that night, everything in my life was about to change. If I am being honest, the story did not start at the funeral. It started long before that, years before, when life was still warm, still ordinary, still filled with the sound of my son's laughter drifting through a house that never felt empty. My name is Linda Parker, and I grew up in a small town in Ohio. Nothing fancy. A place where neighbors waved from their porches, where grocery store cashiers knew your birthday, where you could leave your door unlocked and expect only the wind to come inside. Michael and I lived in a modest 2-bedroom house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. It wasn't much, but it was ours. It held our memories. It held our stories. When Michael was born, he came into the world quiet. The nurses thought something was wrong, but he was fine, just looking around with these big, gentle eyes, taking everything in like he had been here before. That calmness stayed with him throughout his whole life. Even as a teenager, when everyone else was loud and wild, Michael was steady. He was the kind of boy who helped neighbors carry groceries, who stayed late at school to stack chairs, who hugged me every single night without fail. "Good night, Mom," he'd whisper at my bedroom door, and I would always answer the same way. "Good night, sweetheart. I love you." We had our share of hardships, every family does. His father left when Michael was 11. One quiet Saturday morning, he said he was going out to get gas for the car. He never came back. Michael pretended it didn't hurt him, but I saw the way he folded into himself, the way he stared at the empty driveway for days. I tried my best to be both mother and father, though I never felt like I was enough. But Michael never complained. He never blamed me. He just kept loving me with that soft strength of his. Years went on. He went to college to states away. Those were hard years for me, but every Sunday he called without missing a single week. "Mom, I'm okay," he'd say. "Are you eating enough?" I'd ask. "I promise I am." He graduated, got a job as an electrical engineer, and even though he moved to Seattle, he visited me twice a year. Each time he'd walk through the front door with the same warm smile, saying, "There's my favorite lady." He meant me, just me. Sometimes that memory alone brings tears to my eyes. When he met Emily, he was 30. He told me about her carefully, almost shyly, as if he was afraid I wouldn't approve. "She's smart, Mom," he said, "funny, and she has this way of making a room feel brighter." I smiled through the phone. I'm happy for you, sweetheart. Truly. When I first met her, she was polite, beautiful, in a polished sort of way, always dressed perfectly, always composed. She called me Mrs. Parker for the first 2 years, even though I gently reminded her to call me Linda. She said it felt more respectful. I didn't mind. I wanted her to feel comfortable. Their wedding was lovely, simple, elegant. Michael looked so happy standing at that altar, waiting for her. And though there were moments when I felt a little left out of decisions, I tried to remember that I was gaining a daughter, not losing a son. I thought we just needed time. I believed all new relationships started with careful steps. But life doesn't always unfold the way you hope. When Michael invited me to move in with them, it came after a long phone call in which he confessed he was worried about me living alone. I had slipped on icy steps earlier that winter, and my doctor suggested I avoid being by myself too much. At first, I resisted. I don't want to be a burden, I said softly. You could never be a burden, he told me. You're my mom. Let me take care of you a little. But I wondered whether Emily felt the same way. When I moved into their home, a 2-story house with white shutters and a quiet living room that smelled faintly of lavender, I noticed small changes right away. Emily's smiles were tight, her greetings short. She didn't like when I cooked, insisting the kitchen stayed cleaner when she prepared meals herself. She didn't like when I folded laundry, because everyone has a system. She didn't like when Michael and I reminisced for too long, because she said it made her feel left out. I tried not to cause waves. I tried to stay invisible. I tried to lessen my footprint in a home that was supposed to be mine too. Michael, bless his heart, never noticed the tension. Or maybe he didn't want to see it. He worked long hours, and whenever he came home tired, I didn't want to burden him with worries about his wife and me. So I stayed quiet. I took morning walks alone. I ate breakfast at odd hours to avoid crowding the kitchen. I kept my things neatly tucked in my room. Still, every now and then, Emily's eyes would linger on me with something that felt like resentment or impatience, as if she were counting the days until I would move out again. But for Michael, I stayed, because he asked me to, because he loved having me close, and because I loved the sound of his footsteps down the hall each evening, coming to check on me, asking if I needed anything. Then one cold November morning, everything changed. Michael didn't come home. He didn't answer his phone. He didn't reply to messages. I remember standing at the front window, staring at the driveway, just like he used to when he waited for his father. Hours passed. Rain tapped against the glass. Emily paced back and forth, her lips pressed into a thin line. At one point, she muttered something like, "He always said this job was too dangerous," but she didn't finish the sentence. By 8 that night, 2 police officers knocked on the door. I don't remember much after that, just fragments. The sound of Emily gasping, the feeling of my knees giving out, a soft voice saying, "I'm so sorry," a world collapsing in slow motion. Michael was gone, just like that. A car accident on the highway. Instant, final, no goodbye, no warning. I lost my breath. I lost my sense of time. I lost the boy I brought into this world. The days that followed came in a blur. People moved around me like shadows. I woke up, slept, cried, walked, and cried again. There was a strange silence in the house, a silence that didn't belong to a home where Michael once lived and laughed. Emily became distant, colder, not softer, not grieving with me, colder. She spent hours in her room, coming out only to handle funeral arrangements or speak to the guests who came to visit. Every time she saw me sitting quietly, her face tightened, as if my sadness was something she needed to step around. I told myself we were both grieving in different ways. I tried to understand, but the night before the funeral, when I heard her whisper to someone on the phone, "I can't do this with her here," something inside me trembled. I brushed it aside. Then the next day, after the funeral ended, she told me to pack my bags, and my world cracked a second time. After the funeral, when the church emptied and the sun dipped behind the clouds, I stepped outside with my purse clutched tightly against my chest. The air was cold to cold for late November, and I remember my fingers trembling as if the wind were passing straight through me. Emily didn't walk with me. She didn't even look at me. She stayed near the steps, talking to 2 women I didn't know. They hugged her, whispered to her, touched her arm tenderly. I stood alone by the parking lot, trying to gather the pieces of myself. Grief made the world feel slow and distant, like I was wrapped in cotton. When she finally walked toward me, her heels stopped 1 step away. She didn't say my name. She didn't ask how I was. She just said, Let's go. Her tone wasn't cruel. It was flat, empty, like a cup someone forgot to fill. We drove home in silence. Rain tapped against the windows, filling the quiet with a soft, steady rhythm. I stared at the dark shapes of trees passing by and wondered if Michael would have hated this, his mother and wife sitting inches apart, unable to even share their pain. When we pulled into the driveway, Emily shut the car door a little harder than necessary. She walked inside without waiting for me. My legs felt heavy, but I followed her, stepping into the house that suddenly felt too large, too hollow, too unfamiliar. The living room lights were off. The house smelled like the flowers people had left earlier, lilies, carnations, roses mixed with the faint scent of rain brought in from our coats. I set my purse down and reached for the light switch, but Emily's voice came from the hallway. Leave it off. I froze. Her silhouette stood near the stairs, arms crossed lightly. I don't want bright lights tonight, she added. Her voice was tired but sharp, like the edge of a glass about to crack. I nodded slowly. All right. I didn't know what else to say. Every word felt too loud for that room. Emily walked into the kitchen without turning the lights on. I could hear her moving things around, opening the fridge, closing it, pouring something. I waited in the dim living room, unsure if she wanted company or solitude. After a minute, her voice came again. Linda, we need to talk. My heart sank. Those words, we need to talk, never bring anything gentle. I walked to the kitchen doorway. The only light came from the small under-cabinet bulb above the sink. It cast soft shadows on her face, making her look both tired and strangely distant. What is it? I asked quietly. She didn't look at me. She kept her eyes on the counter, her fingers tapping against a cold glass. I meant what I said earlier. At the church. My stomach tightened. You want me to leave? I whispered. Emily nodded, still staring at the counter. I can't do this with you here. I'm not trying to make anything harder, I said slowly, forcing the words through a tightening throat. I'm just trying to grieve Michael, the same way you are. She let out a sharp breath, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. Grieving with you feels like a competition, she said. Like you think you loved him more. My hand pressed to my chest. Oh, Emily, I would never. She lifted her hand, stopping me. Well, that's how it feels. There were so many things I wanted to say, but grief had drained all my strength, leaving only quiet humility. I didn't realize, I murmured. She finally looked up. Her eyes were dry for someone who had just buried her husband. I think, she said slowly, you should go back to Ohio. It's better for both of us. I swallowed. Tonight? Yes. No hesitation, no softness. A crack ran through me, deep, sharp. Emily, I don't have anyone back in Ohio anymore. I don't even have a place there. She shrugged. You must have someone. I don't. Well, she said, picking up her glass. You'll figure it out. Then she walked away. Just like that. No comfort, no shared sadness, no sense of family. I stood alone in the dark kitchen, listening to the faint sound of her closing her bedroom door upstairs. The house grew colder, quieter. The shadows stretched long across the floor. For the first time since Michael passed, I felt completely, utterly alone. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. I didn't pack, not yet. My suitcase lay open on the floor, but I just stared at it. My hands wouldn't move. My heart wouldn't accept what was happening. Instead, I found myself whispering to the quiet room, Michael, if you can hear me, please give me strength. There was no answer, just the soft hum of the heater and the distant sound of a car passing outside. I cried quietly into my hands, not wanting Emily to hear. My tears fell onto the blanket, not loud sobs, just slow, steady drops of sadness, the kind that feel too heavy to hold inside. When my tears finally stopped, I folded a few clothes into the suitcase. A sweater, 2 blouses, a few personal things, but my legs trembled with every step. I wasn't ready to leave, not because I wanted to stay in that house, but because leaving felt like letting go of Michael one more time. The next morning, Emily didn't come out of her room until nearly 10. I was in the kitchen, quietly making tea. When she saw me, she paused, her expression unreadable. You're still here, she said. I thought, my voice wavered. I thought I could have just one more day to figure out where to go. She closed her eyes briefly, impatient, not sympathetic. Fine, but today, Linda, you have to leave today. I nodded. That afternoon, small tensions began to appear like cracks in old paint. She didn't eat lunch with me. She didn't ask if I needed help booking a bus or arranging anything. She didn't ask where I planned to go. She simply moved around the house with a cold distance, as if I were a stranger intruding on her grief. But grief doesn't compete. It doesn't divide. It doesn't say who loved who more. It simply hurts. It hurts silently. It hurts in different corners of the same home. By evening, the air in the house felt thick. Emily paced the hallway, speaking on the phone in short, clipped sentences. I heard her say, "She's still here, and I can't take this anymore, and I need space." I didn't know who she was speaking to, but I quietly went back to my room. My suitcase was packed now, my coat folded, my purse tucked with a few essentials. Still, something inside me felt unsettled. Not just grief, something else, something I couldn't name yet. Later that night, I walked to the living room to turn off the lamp. Emily was there on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She barely looked up. "I'll be gone in the morning," I said softly. She nodded once. "Good." That word pierced deeper than any other. Good. As if my absence was a relief. As if my presence had been a burden even before Michael died. I went back to my room and lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come, just thoughts, memories, questions. Why did she grow distant after his death? Why did she want me gone so quickly? Why did her grief look so controlled, so emotionless? I tried to quiet my mind, tried to breathe slowly, tried to hear Michael's gentle voice telling me it would be okay. But before dawn, something happened that changed everything. A sound, soft but sharp, like a drawer slamming. Then another. Voices, whispering, urgent. I sat up, heart pounding, listening through the darkness. Emily wasn't alone, and whoever was with her wasn't trying to hide. I sat frozen on the edge of the bed, listening. The house was dark, but something about the sound, those hurried whispers, that sharp clatter made the hair on my arms rise. At first, I thought maybe Emily had simply dropped something. Maybe she couldn't sleep. Maybe grief finally cracked through the surface she worked so hard to keep polished. But then I heard another voice, a man's voice, low, quiet, familiar. My breath caught in my chest. I pushed the blanket aside and slipped my feet into my slippers. The hallway was dim, lit only by the nightlight near the bathroom. Each step felt like I was walking through thick fog, each heartbeat loud enough to echo. As I reached the top of the stairs, I stopped. The voices were coming from the living room. Emily's voice came first. "Will you keep your voice down?" she whispered sharply. Then the man answered, "I am keeping my voice down. You're the one panicking." Panic? Why would she be panicking? I held the railing lightly. My hands trembled. Grief does strange things to the mind. It makes you imagine things, fear things, misunderstand things. But this wasn't imagination. This was real. I stepped down the staircase slowly, each step careful. When I reached the final step, I stayed hidden behind the wall, peeking just enough to see the edge of the living room. Emily stood by the couch, her arms crossed. She was wearing the same clothes she had worn all day, a gray sweater and black leggings, but her hair was messy now, her face tense. Standing across from her was Jack Allen, Michael's best friend since high school, the man who gave the eulogy earlier that day. The man who cried openly at the church. The man who hugged me tightly afterward and whispered, "He loved you so much, Linda." My breath shook. I took a step back and held onto the wall. Jack was the last person I expected to see there. "What if she hears us?" Emily hissed. "She's asleep," Jack replied. "It's past 3. I swallowed. I wasn't asleep, and I wasn't supposed to hear this. Emily began pacing, rubbing her temples. "This is wrong. All of this is wrong. I can't do this right now." Jack stepped closer to her. "We talked about this," he said softly. "You said after the funeral, not tonight," she snapped. "Not with her still here." My heart thudded. Her, she meant me. Jack lowered his voice. "Emily, we can't hide forever." I pressed my hand to my mouth, trying to quiet the sound of my breathing. Something inside me was unraveling slowly, thread by thread. Emily turned away from him, leaning on the back of the couch. "She needs to leave," she whispered. "I can't pretend anymore. I can't keep looking at her face. It feels like she can see the truth." "What truth?" I wanted to whisper, but I stayed still. Jack sighed. "She's not your enemy." Emily stiffened. "You don't understand. Having her in this house, it's like he's still here, watching me, judging me." Jack stepped behind her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "He wouldn't judge you." Emily's voice cracked just barely. "You don't know that. Jack pulled her into a gentle hug. Too gentle, too familiar. My stomach tightened. My knees felt weak. Emily leaned against him like someone who had done it many times. I just need her gone, she whispered into his chest. I need to breathe again. Jack kissed the top of her head. I know, he murmured. We'll figure everything out. I closed my eyes. Pain shot through me, not just emotional, but physical, sharp, heavy, suffocating. Grief I had expected. Loneliness I had prepared for. But this was something else entirely. A betrayal I didn't see coming. A truth I wasn't ready to face. I stepped back silently, moving toward my room as slowly as possible. My legs shook, my chest felt tight, and my breath came in shallow waves. When I finally reached my room, I shut the door quietly and sat on the bed, pressing both hands to my face. I didn't know the full story. I didn't know what had happened between them. But the pieces were beginning to form a shape I didn't want to recognize. Had Emily been involved with Jack before Michael died? Or had it begun after? During the grief? During the silence? During those days when she locked herself in her room? I didn't know, but I knew enough. Emily wanted me gone because she didn't want anyone in the house who might see the truth, who might question her, who might understand that her grief wasn't just grief, it was guilt mixed with something else, something darker. As dawn approached, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the first faint line of sunlight touch the street. My suitcase sat by the door, ready to leave. But now, leaving didn't feel like a simple goodbye. It felt like being pushed out of a story I was never meant to question. Around 7 in the morning, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I wiped my face and took a slow breath, preparing myself. A knock sounded at my door. Linda? Emily's voice. I turned slowly. Yes. The door opened a few inches, enough for her to poke her head in. Her face looked composed now, like the night had never happened. But her eyes looked hollow. Are you leaving soon? She asked. There was no warmth, no remorse, nothing to suggest she had spent the night in the arms of her husband's best friend. Yes, I whispered. I'm leaving. Good, she said softly. I think that's best. I nodded, my hands clasped tightly. But then she said something that pierced through me like ice. And Linda, please don't mention anything to anyone about how things have been lately. I don't want rumors, especially now. I stared at her. She wasn't asking, she was warning. I nodded slowly. I won't say anything. Not yet. Not until I understood what I had really seen. Not until I knew the full truth. Emily closed the door quietly. And in that quiet moment, I knew something with absolute certainty. I wasn't just leaving her house. I was leaving behind the last piece of the life I built with my son. But I was also leaving with a question that wouldn't quiet down. What really happened to Michael? Grief alone didn't explain Emily's coldness. Guilt alone didn't explain Jack's late-night visit. And fear alone didn't explain why she wanted me gone so urgently. There was something else, something hidden beneath the surface of her carefully controlled expressions. And even though I didn't know it then, the truth was waiting for me, closer than I imagined, and more painful than I was prepared to face. Leaving that house felt like leaving a battlefield I never signed up to fight in. The morning air was cold when I stepped outside with my suitcase. Frost covered the edges of the lawn, turning the grass brittle and pale. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like everyone else is still asleep while your world is falling apart. I paused at the end of the driveway, gripping the handle of my suitcase. This wasn't how I imagined leaving my son's home. Not quietly, not alone, not with my heart carrying more weight than my luggage ever could. A single memory surfaced the day Michael and Emily bought that house. They had invited me over for dinner, excitedly showing me all the little things that made it theirs. The living room gets the best morning light, Michael had said proudly. And the kitchen window looks straight at the maple tree, Emily added. They had looked so happy, so full of plans, so full of life. I closed my eyes and took a slow breath, steadying myself before walking toward the bus stop 2 blocks away. I didn't know where I was going, but I told myself I would figure it out one step at a time. As I reached the street corner, I heard someone calling my name. Linda? I turned. It was Jack. For a moment, my heart stumbled. Memories of the night before replayed sharply, his whispered voice, his arms around Emily, that quiet intimacy. He jogged toward me, wearing a black coat and tired eyes. Where are you going? He asked gently. I forced a small, polite smile. Away for a while. He frowned. Emily said you were leaving, but She didn't say where. That's because she didn't ask. Jack looked down, pressing his lips together. Do you want a ride? He offered. I can take you wherever. No, thank you, I interrupted. I didn't trust myself to hear anything more from him. Not yet. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. Okay, but can I talk to you for a minute? I tightened my grip on the suitcase handle. A part of me didn't want to hear anything he had to say, but another part, an older, quieter part, knew that understanding begins with listening. All right, I said softly. We walked to a nearby bench near the bus stop. The wood felt cold beneath me. Jack sat a few inches away, rubbing his hands together as if unsure how to begin. I'm worried about Emily, he said finally. A bitter ache rose in my chest. I wanted to tell him I was worried too, just not for the same reasons. Why? I asked carefully. He looked out at the empty street. She hasn't been herself since Michael passed. She's been pushing people away, not letting anyone in. Not me, not her mother, not her friends. I raised an eyebrow. Not letting you in? He winced at the tone. Linda, it's not what you think. I looked down at my hands. My son is gone, Jack. I don't have the strength for vague explanations. He inhaled slowly. Emily and we weren't having an affair. I didn't respond. I let the silence stretch. He continued. We were talking that night because she had this panic attack. She called me around 1 a.m, crying. She didn't want to wake you. She said she felt like she couldn't breathe in that house anymore. My breath softened. She didn't seem like she was crying. She hides it, he said. She hides everything, even from herself. I kept my gaze lowered, letting his words settle slowly like dust finding its place. Then he lowered his voice. Linda, she blames herself for Michael's death. My head jerked up. What? Why would she think that? Jack looked pained. They fought the morning he died. I felt the air leave my lungs. Jack continued, voice quiet. Emily told him she felt lonely in the marriage. She said she wished he worked less. Michael got upset. Not angry, just upset. He left the house faster than he should have. He didn't say goodbye. A pause. And on the highway, he lost control. I pressed a trembling hand to my chest. A tear escaped before I could stop it. Oh, Michael? I whispered. Jack glanced down. She's convinced that if she hadn't started that argument, he wouldn't have been on the road. She hasn't slept properly in days. She barely eats. And when you're around, she feels your grief as a reminder of her own guilt. He paused, letting those words land gently. She's not pushing you away because she hates you, Linda. She's pushing you away because she hates herself. A fragile silence settled between us. I closed my eyes, letting the truth sink in. Emily wasn't cold because she didn't feel anything. She was cold because she was drowning in everything. Grief, guilt, fear, shame. And sometimes drowning people push others under without meaning to. Jack stood slowly. I'm not defending the way she treated you, he said softly. It wasn't fair, but she's not a bad person. She's just lost. I breathed out shakily. So am I, Jack nodded. I know, and I'm sorry. We stood there for a moment, both looking at the quiet street, where morning light spread slowly across the pavement. Finally, I whispered, I need some time, away from that house, away from all of it. Jack's voice softened. I understand. The bus approached from a distance. He took a hesitant step closer. If you ever need anything, even just someone to talk to, call me, please. I nodded once. The bus stopped. I climbed on without looking back, but as the bus pulled away, I glanced out the window and saw Jack still standing on the sidewalk, watching the bus leave with a sorrowful stillness. He wasn't the enemy. Emily wasn't the enemy. Grief was the enemy, twisting all of us into shapes we didn't recognize. I didn't travel far, just to a small inn on the other side of the city, a quiet place with warm lights and soft carpets. The woman at the reception spoke gently, as if sensing the storm inside me. You can stay as long as you need, she said. The room she gave me was simple: a small bed, a window overlooking a maple tree, and a little desk with a lamp. I set my suitcase down and sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of the last few days settle into my bones. For the first time since Michael's death, I let myself breathe without hiding it. I cried, not from betrayal, not from anger, but from the endless ache of missing someone you can never hug again. When the tears finally slowed, I walked to the window and looked at the maple tree, the same kind Emily once admired in her own backyard. Life had a way of circling back, even through pain. I whispered into the quiet room, Michael, please help us. We're all breaking without you. And for the first time since he passed, I felt something soften inside me, not healing, not yet, but the first gentle step toward understanding. I spent the next 2 days at the small inn in quiet reflection. The maple tree outside my window had become my companion. Every morning, I watched sunlight land softly on its branches. I listened to the faint rustle of its leaves. Something about that stillness gave me the space I needed to feel things I had pushed deep inside: fear, confusion, grief, and something else I didn't want to name just yet. Silence, when you finally allow it in, speaks louder than anything else. On the third morning, while I was drinking weak hotel room coffee and staring at a folded newspaper I wasn't really reading, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. A moment passed before I picked up. Hello? A quiet breath came from the other side. Linda? It was Emily. My chest tightened. Yes, I said softly. I'm here. Another breath, longer this time. I could hear emotion trembling in that silence, emotion she had kept locked tight for far too long. I'm sorry for calling you, she whispered. I wasn't sure you'd answer. I wasn't sure either, I admitted. She swallowed audibly. Do you have time to talk? I looked out the window at the maple tree, its branches swaying gently. Yes, I said. I do. Emily's voice was fragile, so unlike the controlled, distant tone she used at home. I don't know how to start, she whispered. You can start anywhere, I said gently. I'm listening. Another shaky inhale. Jack told me he saw you leave that morning. He told me you looked broken. I closed my eyes. I was trying not to be. Silence again. Then Linda, I am so sorry, she said suddenly, her voice cracking. For the things I said, for the way I treated you, for pushing you out of your own son's home. It was cruel. I know that now. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped the phone. Emily, I didn't want to make things harder for you. But you didn't, she said. I did. I made everything harder. For both of us. Her breath hitched, and I realized she was crying. Soft, quiet tears she had hidden from everyone, even herself. I wasn't grieving right, she whispered. Not the way I expected. Not the way people said I should. I felt angry, then numb, then guilty, and then terrified. I thought if I just held everything inside, it would eventually stop hurting. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. That's not how grief works, I said gently. I know that now, she whispered. But back then, I kept thinking I needed to stay strong. It's what Michael always said about me, that I was the strong one, the steady one. Her voice faltered. And then, after our argument that morning, when he left without kissing me goodbye, I kept replaying it in my head, over and over. What I said, how I said it. Every word felt like a piece of the accident. My eyes stung. Emily, you didn't cause the accident. She let out a sob. I feel like I did. Guilt, I realized, is its own kind of grief. It grows quietly. It fills the empty spaces. It makes you fear your own reflection. Michael loved you, I said. A single argument doesn't erase that. Not ever. I know, she whispered, but I pushed that love away. And when you were still in the house, grieving the way I couldn't, I felt like you were looking through me, like you knew what I had done. I swallowed. I never judged you. I judged myself, she whispered. A long silence followed, not heavy, just honest. Then she spoke again, softer. And I know you heard Jack and me talking that night. My heart skipped. So she knew. I shouldn't have been there in the middle of the night with him, she said. It wasn't what it looked like. I wasn't trying to replace Michael. I just needed someone who understood both of us. Someone who knew him like I did. She hesitated. And Jack was there for both of us for years. He's been like a brother to me. That night, I just needed someone to remind me I wasn't losing my mind. I nodded slowly. I understand, I said quietly. And I'm not angry. She let out a broken laugh. You should be. Maybe. But I'm not. Another silence. This one thicker with emotion. Linda, can we meet? She whispered. Not at the house. Somewhere neutral. I want to say these things to you in person. Please. I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to go, but because I wasn't sure my heart was ready. But then I remembered something, Michael's soft voice in my memories, always urging kindness, always urging peace. Yes, I said gently. We can meet. We chose a small cafe downtown. quiet, bright, warm. I arrived 10 minutes early. The smell of fresh pastries filled the air, and soft piano music drifted from speakers near the ceiling. I sat near the window, hands wrapped around a cup of tea that was too hot to drink. When Emily walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. Her hair was pulled back messily. Her eyes were tired. Her face held none of the cold control I had seen these past weeks. She looked human, fragile, hurting. She sat across from me slowly. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. I nodded. For a moment, we sat in silence, just breathing the same air, letting the weight of everything settle between us. Then Emily reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. "This was Michael's," she said softly. My heart stilled. She slid the envelope across the table. I stared at it, terrified and grateful all at once. "I found it in his desk drawer after he died," she said. "I wanted to give it to you that day, but I couldn't. I wasn't ready." My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter, written in Michael's familiar handwriting. "Mom, I know life keeps changing faster than either of us are ready for. I hope you always remember that I love you. I hope you stay close to us. I want you to be part of our life always. Don't ever think you're a burden. You're the reason I know how to love. And one day, when Emily and I have kids, I want them to know their grandmother. I want them to grow up with your kindness around them. Thank you for everything, for all the years, for all the love." Michaela's small gasp left my lips. My shoulders shook. Tears fell silently, dripping onto the paper. Emily reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for everything, for pushing you away, for hurting you when you were already hurting. I wasn't myself. I'm still not, but I want to try. If you'll let me." I looked up slowly. Her eyes weren't cold anymore. They were raw, open, human. "I forgive you," I said softly. Her shoulders fell as if she had been carrying the whole world alone. "I don't deserve that," she whispered. "None of us deserves forgiveness," I said. "But we all need it." Her lips trembled. "Will you come back to the house? Not to stay, not yet, just to talk, maybe to start over." I was quiet for a long moment, not because I needed to think, but because I needed my heart to slow down enough to answer clearly. "Yes," I whispered finally. "We can start over." Emily closed her eyes, letting out a shuddering breath. "Thank you." We sat there for nearly an hour, talking, listening, not rushing anything. Emily told me about her guilt, about her sleepless nights, about the way she felt she was failing Michael even after he was gone. I told her about my loneliness, about the fear of losing the only family I had left. Slowly, hesitantly, we began to see each other again, not as adversaries, not as obstacles, but as two women grieving the same man from different sides of the same wound. When we stepped out of the cafe, the sun was gentle and warm. Emily hugged me softly, fragile but sincere. "I want to do better," she whispered. "I believe you," I said, because I did, not because she was perfect, not because I forgot everything she had done, but because grief wounds the heart, and healing comes only when we allow space for grace. As we parted ways, I felt something I hadn't felt since before Michael died. A small, hesitant flicker of hope. Not enough to heal everything, but enough to begin. In the weeks that followed, life didn't suddenly become easier. Grief didn't vanish. The ache didn't disappear. The silence in my heart didn't magically fill itself. But something shifted quietly, like the way morning light softens the darkness without fanfare. Emily and I met often after that day at the cafe. Not every day, not always for long, but enough. Enough to rebuild the parts of us that had shattered. Enough to learn how to speak honestly without fear. Enough to understand that we weren't enemies, just two grieving women who didn't know how to find each other when the world fell apart. Sometimes we walked around the park together, wrapped in scarves, sharing memories of Michael. Sometimes we sat quietly on a bench, not talking at all, just breathing the same cold air, letting grief pass through us instead of trying to outrun it. Other times, she would cry, not the controlled, silent tears she used to hide, but deep, human sobs that shook her shoulders. And I would hold her, not as a mother-in-law, not as someone who once felt pushed away, but simply as someone who understood loss. And slowly, she began to hold me too. One afternoon, as we sat overlooking the lake, Emily whispered something that stayed with me. "You know, Michael always wanted us to get along. He used to say you and I were the two strongest women he knew." I felt my eyes warm. "He was always too generous with his words," I said softly. "No," she whispered. He saw something in us, and I want to honor that. I nodded, pressing my hand gently over hers. We both do. I didn't move back into the house. Not right away. Some wounds need space to breathe before they can close. Some hearts need room before they can beat in rhythm again. But I visited often. I helped her sort through Michael's belongings, not all at once, never in one single day, but little by little, drawer by drawer, memory by memory. Sometimes we found things that made us laugh. A silly photo from college, a mug he bought that said "World's Okayest Engineer," a notebook filled with ideas for future projects. Sometimes we found things that broke us open. A birthday card he never finished writing, a voicemail clip he saved, a sweater that still held the faintest trace of his cologne. Through it all, we learned to grieve together. Not perfectly, not gracefully, but honestly. One morning, a few months after the funeral, I woke up in my in-room to a message from Emily. It was simple. Would you like to come over for dinner tonight? My heart warmed in a way it hadn't in a long time. I typed back, yes, I'd love to. When I arrived, she greeted me at the door with a gentle hug. The house felt different, lighter, warmer, lived in again, as if the shadows had finally begun to lift. We ate quietly at the kitchen table, sharing a homemade casserole she had tried for the first time. Halfway through dinner, she looked up with soft eyes. Linda, she whispered, thank you for not giving up on me. I reached across the table, taking her hand. We didn't give up on each other, I said. That's what matters. Her lips trembled into a small, sincere smile. And in that moment, I could almost feel Michael there with us, not in sadness, not in longing, but in the quiet peace of two hearts learning to heal the way he would have wanted. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that grief doesn't separate us. Fear does, misunderstanding does, silence does. But when we choose to reach across the hurt slowly, gently, bravely, love finds a way to return. Maybe not the same as before, maybe softer, maybe different, but still love, still real, still worth trying for. And that is how Emily and I found each other again. Not as perfect people, not as people without regrets, but as human beings who loved the same man, and who chose, little by little, to love each other too.